He earned his bachelor's degree from the Royal School of Library and Information Science at the University of Copenhagen and has a joint master's degree from the Universities of Oslo, Parma, and Tallinn. And for those Danes in the group, forgive me if I'm messing up some of those names. Prior to accepting the position as Executive Director of the Museum of Danish America, he was the Library Director of the Morton James Public Library in Nebraska City. Rasmus is currently the Executive Director of the Museum of Danish America in Elkhorn. He is a board member of the Danish American Heritage Society and a regional U.S. representative of the Danes worldwide. Please join me in welcoming Rasmus Thogersen to Grand.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and everyone can hear me, right? Awesome. First of all, I want to apologize for the title. I had to come up with a title in a couple of minutes, and so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for what I'm about to tell you. But I thought it was catchy when I came up with it, so it's not really going to be what the presentation is. So I'm here to talk about immigration, Danish immigration into the United States. I'm here to tell you about the historic perspective on what happened when Danes came over here, sort of give you a background on all that. And then I'm going to frame it in the context of my own experience as an immigrant. I guess you spoiled half the presentation by giving you the bio of like who I am and where I'm from. But I'm a recent immigrant, and I do think that in the context of something like the Global Vision Week, that I have something to say about immigration and how we think about immigration, and how we think about reconstruct our identities. So I'll just get started. And it's going to be a little, the PowerPoint, I usually just do that so to kind of give me some structure in what I'm saying. So I tend to just ramble. I always say that I'm not a presenter. I just like to talk, so that's what I'll be doing. Feel free to shout, and if you have any questions, raise your hand. And I have sort of a loose agenda that we'll get started on. And I know most of you probably know Star Wars, and you know that Star Wars started with episode 5. So I'm going to, 5, right? 4? 5, 4, whatever. Episode 4. So I'm going to start my immigrant story with part 2, and that's my personal story of what happened when I came to America. So I came to the United States on December 8, 2013. I arrived with hardly any money, and I had to move in with my in-laws. And while I was applying for jobs in Europe, my wife was applying for jobs over here, and she eventually got a job. We had approximately $2,000 in our bank account when that happened. Again, we were staying with our in-laws. We were driving an old speeder car, and so we managed to sort of. She got a job here, so that's when we decided now we're going to stay in the United States. And I decided now I have to be an American, now I have to live here. So that's what we tried to do. And after I got the green card, that was 6 months after I arrived, more or less. I started volunteering at the public library. That led to me becoming, I became a librarian at the Lincoln Public Libraries in Lincoln, Nebraska. 12 months after that, I became the library director at the public library, which has been my sort of career dream all along. And more or less a year after I started that, I was interviewing to become the executive director at the Museum of Danish America, which is the largest institution anywhere in the world outside of Denmark that preserves Danish cultural heritage. And I got the job. I'm very happy to have gotten the job. So that's the end of my immigration story thus far. That's sort of the nice, good feeling story you have for someone coming to America, and it's really, you do all these great things, right? I'm going to get back to why it's a true story, but it's also, there's more to it than just that good feeling story of someone coming over here and just making it for himself. And I'm going to try to talk that within the context of immigration, like as it used to be and what immigration is now. And I do want to give one major disclaimer for all this. At some point, especially at the end of the presentation, I'm going to take off the executive director hat, and I'll be talking as myself. So if you feel like you disagree with what I'm saying, or you read some certain political bias into any of the statements I will be making, I just want to say very clearly that it might be sort of your bias, it's certainly not mine. And if you do take offense, then you know it's me, it's not the museum. So blame the clown, not the service, right? Okay, let's get started on Denmark to America. So the first Danes that came to America, they didn't really come to America. There are myths about Vikings visiting Minnesota. They have runestones up there where Vikings might have cast something into walls, and it's probably not really true. But what we do know for certain is that Denmark established themselves in the U.S. Virgin Islands around 1666. But as far as the mainland America, they really started kind of coming into America in the middle of like 1850. That's when the first big wave of immigrants started coming over here to the United States. Before that, only like 60 Danes a year came over. So that was the first wave of immigrants coming into the United States around that time. And it started really, the first big thing that you can say that started back in Denmark was that absolutism was ended on June 5th of 1849. So that means that basically we signed the Danish Constitution. We no longer have a total monarchy. We have a parliamentary democracy now. We have a constitutional monarchy. And what also happened at the time was that Mormons had translated the Book of Mormon. They came to Denmark and they were missionaries. And they convinced a lot of people to come over to the United States. So the first big sort of push or pull, if you will, to the United States was the church, the Mormons that were missionaries. That sort of ended around 1860, and then in Denmark around that time, thanks to the medical breakthroughs, and this is the same all over Europe, people started living longer. We were running out of land. So a lot of people lived on the family farms, and they were not like the first in line to inherit the farm. So what are you going to do? There's no more land to get anywhere, and you can go to the cities. But the cities back then were not that pleasant. So a lot of people started thinking about what can I do to make a better life for myself and a better life for my children. And that's nothing specifically Danish about this. That's sort of part of the point as well. It's not a unique Danish experience. It's just sort of what happened all over Europe at the time. So that was sort of the first wave. We say from 1860 to 1930, the numbers are a little unclear. People are still actually working on that, but around 300,000 people moved from Denmark to the United States. So this is, and today, a little less than 1.5 million people claim Danish heritage in the census. So there's a lot of people that came over, especially for such a small country. There are a couple of things I want to talk about when I talk about the Danish sort of how it was in Denmark back then. Because it wasn't an easy life, of course it wasn't. And it wasn't an easy life coming over here, of course it was not. We recently at the museum has been working with a Danish production company about these documentaries. And the first one actually aired yesterday on Danish national TV. I hope you guys get to see it in the next year when they release the rights and we can show them over here. And one of the main points of contention, one of the main arguments we would always have with this production company, and they're journalists, they're storytellers, they want to tell all these horror stories of how people died in the boats, and how the Oregon Trail, you know that game where they all die of dysentery. They go out on the prairie, they all sort of die, it's sort of horrible. Sure, it was not an easy life, but if you compare it to what happened like in Ireland and other places where people fled persecution or there was starvation, I mean, it was rough, but for the times it wasn't anything in particular. So but anyways, they came over, and the idea of, I'm going to get back to why it's kind of relevant that it wasn't the harshest immigrant life they had. And another thing I want you to hold on to is that, so in 1881, the Danish Brotherhood was formed. It's sort of this fraternal insurance organization, so they had life insurance, and they started that time, and in 1925, that was around the heyday, 1920s. They had approximately 25,000 members across the United States. So it was a big organization for its time. And that was a place where people met and they shared news they helped each other. It was about life insurance, but they also shared news from the old country, and they just embraced that Danishness and they sort of enjoyed being together. And then the second wave of immigration is 1950 to 1960, where approximately 25,000 people came over. It's a little different group of people that came over. The first wave was mainly consisting of laborers. They were from the rural parts of Denmark, but also craftsmen. The second wave was mostly sort of what you would call young professionals today, so people that had some sort of trade, but they wanted to get out of post-World War II Europe, and they wanted to make a life for themselves. And the United States at that time was sort of booming in a way that was very enticing to people that they were looking for adventure. So that's the the immigration story that we normally tell, I guess, at the museum in much greater detail, but that's sort of the gist of it. I would strongly invite you to go to the Museum of Danish America if you want to learn a lot more about all this stuff. It's a little different now. So, as was mentioned in my introduction, I am a regional representative of Danes worldwide. I don't know if you could read this, the font is fairly small. People that leave Denmark now, they leave for very different reasons. The Danish diaspora, if you will, the current diaspora of Danes, no one really has the hard numbers, but the organization that I'm a part of, they estimate that approximately 200,000 people live outside of Denmark that are still Danes. And 20% of them, roughly, they live in the United States. They mostly move to big cities. They move to New York, they move to San Francisco, they move to Los Angeles to become movie stars. And some of them make it. And so it's not farmers coming over, it's not people that want to start dairies, it's people that have these wild ambitions typically, and it's people with educational backgrounds to match that and the resources to come over. And another thing you can say about these groups is that communication, as it is now, is very different from what it used to be. When you talk about how you construct your identity, how you maintain your identity, back when people first came over, it was a one-way ticket, typically. You're not going to come back. That's it. You leave, you might come back, but most often you would not. That's just the nature of it. You get a one-way ticket, the ticket's expensive. You go over to the United States and you stay there, and you exchange letters, and that can take a long time. Later on, they invent the telephone, right? The telegraph and the telephone, and things become easier. And what I always say is the way I talk to my grandmother nowadays is that I have Skype on my phone. So I have Skype on my phone. And the time difference is 7 hours, so she can only talk in the morning. So I live in Omaha, I commute to Elkhorn when I work at the museum. So I can turn on Skype on my phone, go online, and have my phone talk to my car over Bluetooth. And then I can talk to my grandmother while driving to work in the morning, instantly. Obviously I'm watching the road, not watching on video, but she can watch me with the phone up like that. And that's just a very different way of thinking about what it is to be an immigrant. Oh, sorry, I'm on making noise now. It's a very different way of thinking about being an immigrant and what that is and what that means, and that, on a very practical level, it's so different now. Another thing on those slides is that some people, Danes that live abroad now, they go home between at least 2 times a year. The average, a lot of them go home more than 2 times a year. That's incredible compared to what it used to be. So you don't give up that connection necessarily in the way you used to. And that's, this is only Danes and Danes in the United States. It's not all immigrants or refugees that come into the United States, and that's a point as well. And another thing you can say about Danes coming over here is that typically they end up, because they come over here to have careers mostly, the main reason they move here is to start a career. Then you have love and you have just them wanting to experience something else, but mostly 50% of them say it's a career move. So they make more money than the average American do. And they also actually, which is great, they also make more money than Swedes and Norwegians. I didn't put that in here, but I think it's important to put out there. I'm going to get back to why I was going to give a different presentation really before I actually started reading about what this week is all about. Because I think oftentimes when I saw the other presenters, all the other presenters, great presenters you guys have here, I'm sad I couldn't be here all this time, is that they come from very different backgrounds. And I think my immigrant experience, and I think to some extent the Danish immigrant experience as a whole, is a little bit, it's privilege. That's something it's kind of a weird thing to be standing around and saying here, but it is an easier experience than I think it is for a lot of people to come over here. I did not have a hard time being an immigrant. I'm going to tell you why it was so easy. I'm going to give a little bit, my part one, my prequel to my immigration story. At the end of this, we'll sort of explain a little bit more about that. I just want to give you a quick background on sort of what Denmark is as well, just in case you know what you've been talking about. We're a fairly small country. We're located there, so in the middle of the world, more or less a little north of the middle of the world. And we, so it's almost 6 million people at this point. We have a monarchy. We have one of the oldest monarchies in the world. We are a social democracy. So it's a system within the government. It has fairly, I guess, rigorous structure for how to organize society, but it is framed within a capitalist society. I think that's an important point to make. I know during the last election cycle, there was a bit of talk from like Bernie Sanders was talking a lot about Denmark as a model of something, and people were talking socialism. Denmark is not a socialist country. That's a misnomer. We're not socialist by any means of the word. We have, like, it's a strong capitalist, it's a free market. But the government, the taxes are pretty high for Americans. You would be shocked to know what I used to pay in taxes back home. There's always like this trade-off. But we're also really happy. And I'm not here telling, I don't know, I'm not a politician, I'm not smart enough to know what the best way to structure a society is. I love both my homes. But one thing, people always talk about, when they talk about Denmark, is the happiness thing. We're really happy. You know, we like being here, we like being alive, we like talking to people, we like all those things. And some of the things that makes us really happy is the fact that we can trust other people. We have a very low rate of corruption in Denmark. And again, this is all, I'm talking about privilege here. That's the whole theme of this. People feel relatively safe, crime is low. Wealth it's a weird thing to say. The average Dane might not necessarily be super wealthy, but sort of in comparison to their neighbors, that's not that high and low, and if you, apparently people seem to, that can make people more happy. People are relatively free and free from, I guess, we Danes are really into freedom of speech, and they really take offense if anyone's persecuted for the way they think about things. And then in terms of civil society, I mean, I think personally Americans are better at volunteering, but apparently, according to the study I'm putting on the slide here, then Danes are also really good at it. Danes do have a really good balance between work and leisure, so the average work week is 37 hours a week, and you get 6 weeks of vacation on average, so that helps be happy, and you raise your hands and wave because you're happy, right, because you get a time off. And so modern day Denmark, people are like in the 1850s to 1920 when people would leave Denmark. Now it's the opposite sort of the truth. So people come to Denmark. There are a lot of immigration stories now. There's a lot of controversies you might know in Europe about immigration and how to deal with immigration and refugees and how to sort of handle all that. I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm just going to give you 2 examples of why people come to Denmark now. The first one's the nice one, right? That's why I came here. Love. You love someone, you go somewhere. That's a great reason to go anywhere. Then there's someone who's persecuted, right? He came because otherwise he would probably have died. And that's, I don't know, it's kind of a depressing thing to talk about, but it's really, it's important to I think, frame that privilege and to be cognizant of how other people can have it. And again, I'm not being political either way. These are complicated problems, and it's really hard to say how you should think about immigration into Denmark, and integration and assimilation. But the matter of the fact is that it happens, and it's something we have to think about. So these 2 slides here, they are part of the new core exhibit at the Museum of Danish America. We recently redid our core exhibit to encompass a broader scope of what the museum is and what we talk about at the museum. And so for us to be able to talk about modern day Denmark in this way is really interesting to me. So it's not, because if you only talk about immigration, the first wave of immigrants, which is what we traditionally have talked a lot about, I think you're not getting full picture. And I think it's important to educate Americans about what Denmark also is. And this is also, it's a problem in Denmark and something we have to talk about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the museum. And normally I just call it the Museum of Danish Americans because that's what we are. But until recently we were called the Danish Immigrant Museum. We changed the name to broaden the scope, as I was just saying with our core exhibit. We want to tell more stories, we want to tell broader stories, and in some way, if you say that you're an immigrant museum, it can actually be a way to exclude people. I honestly have a hard time thinking of myself as an immigrant, despite the fact that I do hold a green card, and I actually submitted my citizenship papers 2 days ago. So in 6 months, I will probably be a US citizen and have 2 passports. But even that, I'm not sure I don't think of myself as an immigrant. I think of myself as a sort of a Danish American. And so words do matter a little bit, so that's not the mindset I have, because immigration to me, at least in the Danish American context, is much more about the two first wave of immigrants. I'm just sort of a guy who ended up here. It's a weird thing to say, but that's anyway. So I want to tell you, for those of you who haven't been there, you should really go. I know some of you have. I see some faces in here that are very familiar. And I can promise you will make it out there pretty soon, so I look forward to seeing you out there. So our museum has approximately 30,000 objects in permanent storage, and that sort of represents the material culture of Danish American cultural heritage throughout history. We are 12 full-time staff and some part-time. We have 25 board members from all over the country. And the main thing I want to tell you about this is we are the national repository, we are the national museum for all this. There are other museums out there that are regional, local, that tell, I guess, smaller stories that sound condescending, but this is the main place for this story to be captured and to be preserved. And we're very proud of that. We have approximately 2,000 member households throughout the United States. I mentioned earlier that approximately 1.5 million people declare Danish heritage on the census, so we have some way to go in terms of getting our numbers from 2,000 to 1.5 million members. So we are located in Elkhorn. We're just 9 miles north of maybe, I guess, something like that. Like an hour drive from here. I was, again, come check it out. It's actually very impressive. That's the windmill. This is a Danish windmill we have in town. The next big thing coming up is a Thanksgiving thing. So we have Julefest, come out and have some æbleskiver and have some fun. This is a promotional thing. So the way we think about the museum and the way we think about our audience is we have our local audience. That's sort of in the Elkhorn area, in the Tri-County area around our museum. And then I'm here speaking to the regional audience. That's within a 100-mile radius, so that's basically, here, and you go to Ames, you go to Omaha, to tell the story and to get you to come to the museum. But one of the most, I guess, important audiences for us now and in the future is the national and international audience at the museum. Because we need to be able to reach out so that all the people from Denmark that live in New York now, that live in Los Angeles, that live in Silicon Valley, because they are the supporters of the future. As we move forward in time and the descendants of the first wave of immigrants, they age and the culture gets diluted over time. We have fantastic people that still support us and still treasure the Danish heritage 3-4 generations in, but it's inevitable that if that's the only story we talk about and the only story we tell, inevitably we're not going to be able to preserve that because we won't have the money for it. And that's just the reality of it. So we have to be able to broaden our scope, hence the name change, and hence us traveling all over the United States. We have traveling exhibits. So we have these, for example, and one way to do that is to have all these traveling exhibits that go all over the United States. So as many venues that we can put them in to tell the stories that we have to audiences all over. We also do a lot of stuff with digital outreach these days. We do virtual tours, we do live streaming of our programs, and you feel free to share the video of me, I guess you're filming this, right? So there you go. Hashtag something, send me an email. And we try to put all our databases online and things like that to make things more accessible. This is a weird slide I sometimes bring. I thought I'd bring it today because it talks a little bit about what I talked earlier. So the bottom bullet point there is immigrant diary versus the expat Instagram. So those are the things we have to think about, right? Because it used to be that you would write a diary and you would send a letter, it's a piece of paper, and that's the source for what unfolded for you as a Danish American. That's not necessarily true anymore. So that's another thing that may or may not keep me up at night thinking about how do we capture these things and how do we preserve them. Because the people that go to Silicon Valley, they're probably not going to sit around writing journals, but they're probably going to take pictures of the food and put it on Instagram. And those things are super ephemeral, but they might be worth something, and it's certainly worth for us to think about how we capture that and how we store that in the future. And then you also have the problem with the millennials versus the guy picking up a check. Because a lot of what I'm talking about now, it can respond well to millennials. And so if you're students here, you might think that sounds really cool. You're not going to support the museum for 30 years, but we are there planting seeds, so it'll be sort of part of what we do in the future. And that's the vision of the future. I'm going to skip straight ahead to my soapbox here. Because I started out by telling you about my great immigrant story. I came over here and it was really wonderful. I think it's very important to note that I came over here with certain things in my luggage and without certain things in my luggage. And I had certain things waiting for me here, and I had certain things that I did not have waiting for me here. So what did I bring here? What did I bring with me? Well, I told you I didn't have a lot of money. I had like zero money, like a couple $1,000. That was it. I had a bag full of clothes. I also had a 2-year master's degree from a fairly well-recognized program in Europe. I had experience in the European Commission. I had experience from CERN, which is the largest physics lab in the world. I had what I consider good schooling. I had a good support network from back home. So that's something that's easy to overlook when you tell the story of, well, it was all great, I just came off the boat and boom, money was on the trees. So then I came with something, right? And so I think when you talk about integration in a sort of a larger scale, a lot of people don't come with that. So that's part of the privilege I'm talking about. So that's something, and what did I not come with? I showed you a slide earlier with a guy who came from Denmark because of war. I didn't come here with PTSD. I didn't come here with anxiety that my family that I left behind was going to be okay. So I didn't have any of those things in the luggage. I had people that were kind of sad that I left, but we could just Skype about it, and I'll go for Christmas. It'll be great. And so, in the same way, so when I came, what did I have when I came here? Well, I had a network. My wife is from Nebraska, and she's the one who helped me get my first job because she knew someone. So, I had in-laws that would host me and they would let us use the car. It wasn't a great car, but it could drive places. So that's part of that privilege again. That when you talk about immigration, I think it's important to remember that it's easy to tell a success story about how wonderful it was, and it has been fantastic. I'm so grateful for everything that's happened over here to me. But it's also important to think of that in the context of what other people go through, and it's not as easy for everyone. And then that's sort of a little bit about my soapbox, because I knew this was going to be in the context of other presentations that you might have gone to where things are a lot rougher. So I thought it would be kind of fascinating to give an insight into what it feels like to not have a problem. And honestly, the paperwork was not that hard. I had money to pay I didn't have to hire a lawyer. And when I finally got to my immigration interview, it took 10 minutes of the immigration officer just chatting and asking questions about the application. And then she started recommending the steakhouse in Lincoln. And that was it. It was a half-hour conversation about restaurants I could go to eat in. So that's super easy. And that's just, I think it's very important when you talk about immigration, and you talk about assimilation and integration into cultures, that it's not so hard if you have a lot of good things in your luggage. But I think personally, and that's again my personal opinion, I think it's a lot harder if you don't have those things coming over sort of anywhere really. If you look at these slides, my master's degree was in the 3 countries that you mentioned. So I studied in Oslo, in Norway, in Tallinn, in Estonia, and in Parma, in Italy. I studied with 16 people from 17 different countries all over the world. One of the first things, I'm a librarian by training. Well, I have like digital library degree, and one of my first experiences was my good friend now, Danish Immigrant. He's from Zimbabwe. He's a librarian as well, but he's from Zimbabwe. The problem that public libraries had in Denmark at the time was, and this is probably still true, is that to maintain relevance. So to actually tell people that what we do is relevant and to be able to sell themselves to people that pay taxes to maintain these libraries. Didymus didn't have a physical collection. He was trying to create a website to put information about the government up there. And before he came to Norway, where we met, he had, the 6 months prior to him going to Norway, his place of work had been raided 2 times by the government, and he had to hide under the toilet. And we're both librarians from very different walks of life. That, meeting him, that was kind of one of those eye-openers. That was my first real exposure to really different cultures. So in a context of like a global vision week like this, it's just so important that, first of all, I want to commend you for having a week like this. I think this is, I wish that you take every single person in the world, when they're done with high school, and they say, okay, now you have to go live somewhere else for 6 months. Now you have to go, so you get your throw at dart at the world, now you have to go live there. And you just have to deal with it. Because it's such a good way to learn how other people think. Go somewhere completely different. See how you can disagree with everything they might say and think and do. But at the end of the day, they're human beings. And I promise you, after 6 months, you'll probably think about a lot of things in a very different way. So having something like this that you guys have here, I think it's a very important way to expose students to these other ways of thinking about the world. So yes, I'm back to my immigrant story, and just that really, spending 2 years with people from like Azerbaijan, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, the United States, Norway, not so different, but nonetheless a little bit different, really sort of changed the way I looked at the world, how I thought about things. So I said that, like winning the slides ago, half an hour ago, I said, well, remember the story about the Danish Brotherhood? So I want to read this quote to you guys from Fuad Ajami. I don't know if you're familiar. He wrote this wonderful book about being a reformer in the Arab world and how he failed at that. How he tried to battle, I guess, what he considered very repressive ideologies and religious ways of looking at the world in the Arab world back then. So he talks about, well, I'll read it to you. So the world had changed and had not changed. This new deadly force, Takfir, declaring one's enemies apostates and religious deviants, was the oldest nationalist sensibility of an earlier time, Takwin, branded dissidents as traitors in the new God. At the core of both forces lay the dread of the other and the impatience with difference. So I want to talk about, I was only told to sort of speak for 35 minutes, so that's what I'll sort of kind of, stop it pretty soon, don't worry, I'll leave you guys alone. But the impatience with difference. I want to talk about the Danish Brotherhood. We still have lodges in the Danish Brotherhood, and some of them are fantastic. I think the modern one's one of the best ones, right? So in 1881, the Danish Brotherhood was formed, and they had the national headquarters in Omaha, and they peaked in the 1920s. After World War I, you might be familiar with the Babel Proclamation in Iowa, stating that you're not allowed to speak anything but English in public gatherings and in churches. So there was that's sort of, it's part of a larger movement that was sort of an anti-European movement, and understandably so, following World War I. And so within the Danish Brotherhood, this conversation on language started. And language being, should they start speaking English in their gatherings? Should they start writing English in their magazine? And that conversation didn't end until 41, when they decided now it's time to sort of switch over, because they no longer teach Danish in your private homes. So why am I telling you all that? Well, people started coming over really the big wave, 1860 and forward. So in 1881, they decided, okay, now we're gonna make this brotherhood. It took 60 years for them to stop speaking Danish. So when you think about having someone that you see, and you have someone to, well, why don't you learn English? I mean, again, I'm not a politician. I'm just saying, be patient sometimes. It takes a while. It took a while for Danes. And Danes are very well assimilated in society. But it takes a little bit of time sometimes to get to that point before you sort of are ready to completely integrate. And the last thing I'm going to tell from my soapbox is that I think it's very important to differentiate between integration, which is what I'm talking about now, and assimilation. I think we should never strive for complete assimilation. I love people that still love their Danish heritage, and I think that's true for everyone. I think we should embrace our heritage, all of us, no matter where we're from. And we should just rejoice that we have so many different backgrounds. And to me, that's really what America is. And that's why I'm happy to be an immigrant. That's it. Any question? I don't know. I had prepared a completely different presentation, but when I actually started reading what this week was about, I decided to just speak a little bit more from what I'm feeling, I guess. So yeah, that's it. Any questions, any comments, you just applaud, that's me. Yes.
Well, I've got a question, just about this thing you just mentioned recently here was, you said that it's actually, or maybe still is, a law in Iowa that you're only allowed to speak English?
Well, it was a big proclamation, I believe it was in 1918. It got reversed sometime later on. But there was a law right at Armistice Day that the government at the time decided that you're not allowed to speak anything but English in churches and public gatherings. It was mostly aimed at Germans, obviously, but it was sort of a catch-all for all. I mean, we have a big Norwegian community here. We have the Czech-Slovak community as well. So all those immigrant communities were affected by that back then. So the Danish proclamation.
Yeah, I was just curious about it because my mother said there was a push not to speak Danish.
And that was
because, especially because it sounded a little bit like German also.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was a big negative.
When was it years? Exactly. Yeah. So that's the reason why. I understand the sentiment, but I think sadly, I think a lot of immigrants from that time they've lost the language because of that, so they just stopped speaking it, which is too bad now. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, I hope it's okay to ask the question, and maybe, since you shared your personal biases.
Yes.
Obviously, you're well aware of the immigration issues in Denmark,
Mm-hmm.
and how Denmark is dealing with those, or not dealing with the immigration issues.
Mm-hmm.
And we, of course, in this country are struggling with immigration, in large part because Congress has not modernized the immigration system for 35 years. So can you do a pretty high-level compare and contrast on how the two different countries are dealing with a similar issue?
Yeah, let's see. Hang on. Well, it's hard to really compare exactly how we deal with it in terms of just basic logistics, because it's hard to stop it. It's hard to stop people coming into Denmark, because people can just drive to Denmark. It's not. In terms of how we deal with it, I mean, if you don't talk about illegal immigration, that's if you talk about how they deal with limiting the number of immigrants or screening immigrants, then it's actually a lot easier to move to the United States than it is to move to Denmark. I would not be able to bring my wife to Denmark right now. Me personally. They're much stricter. They have much stricter language requirements. So Denmark right now is one of the strictest places in Europe in terms of immigration. They're very, very harsh on immigrants. And there are two sides to the coin. It's complicated. It's a wicked problem. There's no solution, and I certainly don't have one. I wish everyone could be happy all the time, but that's not the case. So we don't have a travel ban, for example. It's not a travel ban in Denmark specifically targeting anyone. They try to implement that, and then people got really upset, so that sort of fell to the ground again. So I don't know if that's an answer. But I haven't done a comparative study on exactly how the legal part works, and I'm going to try to immigrate to Denmark, but I do know that they are way stricter. And and you can make the argument that maybe they have to be, because it's a lot easier just to go to Denmark than it is to go here, while he's from some countries. Yes?
Does Denmark have birthright citizenship like in the United States? If an immigrant comes to Denmark and has a child,
Yes.
is that child a Danish citizen, which is how it works in the United States?
As a child, no. If you're born in Denmark, yes.
Okay.
There are some cases where they come in. I mean, specifically in Denmark, they are really, they talk a lot about your connection to the country. So there are these very specific rules. I mean, it's not very high level, but very specific rules about how you have to have lived in Denmark for so long before you can sort of bring a spouse in. You have to be of a certain age. And that's why I mentioned I couldn't bring my wife to Denmark, because I've been away from Denmark for more than 5 years. So the Danish government would doubt that I'm actually attached to the country. And I think that's when the pendulum maybe swing too far. And that's the organization I represent, Danish Worldwide. We are sort of working on modifying the policy right now, because it's sort of a catch-all. So I get that you're trying to limit people coming in and under false pretenses, but it also means that a lot of people that would maybe, if I want to retire in Denmark, it would be hard for me with my current family situation. Yeah. But no, you don't. No, I mean, if you're born in Denmark, then yes, then you're a citizen. Otherwise, no. Yeah, it can be complicated. Like the other cases where you have a husband who goes out, he's accepted around the world, and he meets someone, they have children, and he can bring the children back, but not his wife. I mean, it's complicated. But I'm glad I'm not a politician. I would hate to have to make those decisions. Yes?
How did Denmark deal with the refugee wave that happened in the last few years?
Well, I think the same way a lot of other people in Europe did. You know, there's people on both. Some people thought we should, stop them at the borders. A lot of churches took them in. It certainly started a lot of conversations about sort of what we should be as a country. The Danes weren't quite as open, I'd say, as Germany were very open to the refugees. They're very accepting, I guess, more so than the Danes. I mean, you deal with it as you can. You try to put people where they have, in a humane way, they have somewhere to be. There were a lot of misconceptions at the time about, I mean, I don't know if you would have read the media coverage back then, but Danes would, there was a story in the news about you cannot come with wealth and expect benefits. So they would take people's wedding rings, and that's not a thing. But that was one of the stories that sort of fake news things, right? That sort of circulated for a while. And so that didn't happen, as to the best of my knowledge. It got debunked later on. But it was a very sudden influx of a lot of people. So you try to do your best, and I think that's what they did. And we're still sort of dealing with the ramifications of who you send back and how you deal with that. And it's I don't know. I'm glad I'm not the one making the decisions again. But I think they do what they can. This is not the talk I normally give. But it's a weird thing to be talking about because I'm not representing Denmark in any way. But it's just it seems appropriate honestly for this context to be talking about this. So again, blame the clown on the surface. I'm just me talking here. I'm not an expert in this. Yeah. Any other questions and comments? Anything else? Yes.
The process of assimilation was played out at Grandview, actually, in
Yes.
the 1920s. They gradually began offering courses that were in English rather than Danish, and the students at the time remarked about how this was a noticeable change and a significant difference, and it also caused people to think more about their identity than they had before.
Well, I think it often happens when you're confronted with something, or when someone forces you to think about it in a certain way, that sort of puts it on the forefront of your mind. If someone challenges what it is you are, then you start thinking about it a little bit more. So that's and I know obviously this is one of the Danish bastions, so yeah, that would have happened at some point. Yeah. Well, thank you.